We've seen fans for heroes and athletes, but it's surprising to see how many people around the world admire a businessman. The man who turned the name Apple, a simple fruit, into the world's most valuable brand. Whenever an Apple product is released, we all know the stir it causes in the world of technology. The man who brought such a craze to the name Apple is Steve Jobs. He's often called the computer wizard and the father of the digital revolution. But Steve Jobs' life wasn't always smooth. From selling used Coke bottles to turning Apple into a company worth 4.8 trillion rupees, his journey is truly remarkable. Let's dive into the life of Steve Jobs in this video. Steve Jobs was born on February 24, 1955, to a Syrian Muslim family in California. However, his parents couldn't raise him, so they gave him up for adoption to Paul and Clara Jobs. Steve Jobs completed high school in California and later joined Reed College. But he didn't like the studies there, and seeing the struggles his parents were going through to pay for his education, he dropped out. During this time, he stayed with his friends, learning calligraphy. Steve Jobs didn't even know why he was learning calligraphy, but he did it because he enjoyed it. He would walk 7 kilometers to a Hare Krishna temple just to get a proper meal once a week. It was at this temple that Steve Jobs developed an interest in spirituality and India. To explore this further, he worked at Atari, a video game company, to save up money and traveled to India in 1974. He spent about 7 months in an ashram where he embraced Buddhism. After a while, he returned to California and reconnected with his childhood friend, Steve Wozniak. Wozniak had a deep interest in electronics, so the two decided to start a company. To raise money, Steve Jobs sold his van, and Wozniak sold his scientific calculator. Finally, on April 1, 1976, they started Apple in Steve Jobs' garage. They began by making printed circuit boards and later advanced to building personal computers. The first Apple computer they released was a huge success. At the time, computers didn't have monitors and were only used by big companies. Recognizing that people needed personal computers, Steve Jobs introduced the Apple II, which was the first computer with a monitor. Apple II became a sensation, and soon Apple was worth millions of dollars. Steve Jobs also launched Macintosh computers, which brought in even more profits. However, Apple needed a CEO. Steve Jobs thought John Sculley, then CEO of Pepsi, would be perfect for the role. To convince him, Jobs asked, "Do you want to sell sugar water for the rest of your life? Or do you want to come with me and change the world with technology?" That one question made John Sculley leave Pepsi and join Apple as CEO. Under their leadership, Apple reached new heights. But then, unexpected problems hit Steve Jobs. On one hand, the company faced financial challenges, and on the other, Apple's sales were dropping due to intense competition from IBM. Internal power struggles at Apple also began. The board of directors made a shocking decision to remove Steve Jobs from all responsibilities at Apple. The man who built the company from scratch was now forced to leave. This devastated Steve Jobs. He had dreamt of making Apple the #1 company in the world, but that dream was shattered. Jobs sold all but one of his Apple shares, keeping just one so he could still receive reports and attend meetings. With the money from selling his shares, he started another computer company called NeXT and also founded Pixar, an animation studio. Pixar went on to produce blockbuster films like Wall-E, A Bug's Life, Toy Story, and Cars. Meanwhile, Apple without Steve Jobs was sinking deeper into losses. The board members realized how much they needed him, so they merged NeXT with Apple and brought Steve Jobs back as CEO. Upon his return, Steve Jobs made some tough decisions, and these choices helped Apple regain profitability. From that point, there was no looking back for Steve Jobs. At a time when people carried Walkmans and cassettes to listen to music, Steve Jobs launched the iPod, a device that could store hundreds of songs without needing any cassettes. It was revolutionary. Soon after, he introduced touchscreen devices like the iPhone and iPad, with features no one had ever imagined. Despite achieving all this, Steve Jobs couldn't even write a single line of programming code. It was his leadership qualities that propelled him to such heights. Just when everything seemed perfect, Steve Jobs faced another setback. He was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, a dangerous disease that slowly deteriorated his health. By 2011, he was so frail that he stepped down as Apple's CEO and appointed Tim Cook as his successor. Finally, on October 5, 2011, Steve Jobs passed away. Though he was the head of a multi-trillion-dollar company, Steve Jobs always kept a simple look: blue jeans and a black t-shirt. From a modest beginning, he left an indelible mark in the fields of computers, music, movies, and mobile phones, earning the title Hero of the Tech Industry. In recognition of his work, several magazines named him the most powerful person in 2007, and Time magazine named him Person of the Year in 2011. Steve Jobs always said, "Everything around you that you call life was made by people no smarter than you. You can change it, you can influence it, you can build your own things that other people can use." Jobs believed that whatever work occupies most of your life should be something you love and find joy in. If not, when you look back at your life, it will be filled with something you didn't enjoy. So find what makes you happy and pursue that. That's why Steve Jobs chose technology as his passion. And with it, he achieved greatness. He continues to inspire millions even today. In one word, if technology were a religion, Steve Jobs would be its god. Friends, that's the story of Steve Jobs.